So I was sitting particularly with
Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books. I only did one this week. See, I'm not going to do 3 every week. I'm going to catch you off guard. This is all part of your training. If you have a cell phone, if you wouldn't mind turning it off. How many were here for the film last night, or how many have seen the film before? All right, good. So we should have a good day today. Next Tuesday, Don Feenerty will be back, and he's bringing 2 people with him to tell you about how to save money. And so that's always useful information. And that'll be next week. Mallory Clegg is one, and Jessica Ryan is the other. They're from the United Way and Unified Banks customer service. And you know Don's a good guy. They'll be here next week at noon. And in 2 weeks, Peter Chakos will be here to tell you about his new book, which is, what's it called, Peter?
Born of Rebellion.
Born of Rebellion, West Virginia and the Civil War. So that'll be on the 26th of April. So if you saw the movie about the Titanic, the more accurate version than Leo DiCaprio and James Cameron, that's what we're going to talk about today. And Dr. Art Barbeau is here. He is Emeritus Professor of History and Anthropology at West Liberty University. Here he is, Dr. Art Barbeau.
I mentioned that my problem is that my back and legs took early retirement. Okay, they did drag me out. I was up there 43 years. And then they dragged me out a couple of years ago because Sandy Cermak, I don't know how many of you know Sandy, she's done some programs. She's the only one I know that takes uppers to come down. She's got that much energy. Now, we do have a group of people that we've been working on this for 19 years through community university, and the school doesn't know what the hell they're planning to do with it. Okay, so I'm directing this initially to our group with 19 years in the slot, but there might be others too. How many of you guys were teachers? I never ever asked that. Okay, so not a great many of you were teachers. Was anybody have credentials in English as a teacher? Okay, no one did. And the reason I ask this is because there are some things, and I had a minor in English, that they never settled. The thing is, you know, there's a whole different set of pronouns, except for things. Okay, and it uses a totally different format. The have you ever heard of the Okay, the is used by a lot of languages. Now, we claim that we're a visual generation. We see things with our eyes. Okay. You're all old enough. Bullshit. And the reason I say that is because show a film with the sound off, a little bit of a film with the sound off, and you'll tell the people, use your eyes. What are you seeing? And some, maybe one or two will make some comment. And then somebody sure to ask, all right, what's the answer? And I say, there ain't any answer. What were the instructions? What do you see with your eyes? But there's no narration, so we were told what we were seeing. Okay. So yeah, I got training specifically as a historian, but anthropology is a hell of a lot more fun. Okay. And so I try to look at things from the anthropological perspective. Okay. And that, well, the other thing, for our group, 19 years we've been doing it, I was trying to find was a Cary Grant film that they hadn't seen before. Because, yeah, they were all hooked on Cary Grant. And the first one I found was in French. Okay. And the phrase was murder ne pas murder. Okay. Was it murder or not? Okay. And again, you'll get the same thing. What are we supposed to see? What are we looking for? And one thing I notice is even animals do it. Okay. Pigeons, bill and coo, right? The last time we were in Japan, my daughter has a degree from Japan. Last time we were there was a shopping trip. Oh, those things excite me. So while they went up this little alley to do their shopping, I sat on a bench right at the edge of the river and was watching the fishermen. Now, what a pigeon will do, a male, is he fans out his tail, puffs up his chest, and he makes a few little cooing sounds. She always walks away, but not too fast, because she's looking over her shoulder to think, what will he do? Okay. And if he does, then they go together and they peck each other's beaks. That's the building. And they make coo sounds. And if she's satisfied, the two of them fly away together, maybe stopping on some rock sticking up in the middle of the stream. There was one, had one hot, because the male she was with, he sat in a puddle for a while, and I'll swear there was steam coming out of that puddle. So, at any rate, this category. Another way you can test it, okay, and this is an experiment. It's now about 400 years since the French started playing with cameras, the middle of the 18th century. So 400 years, and what have they seen? They have not yet ever seen a movie, a motion picture, any of that kind of thing. Well, what the hell are they doing? What they're doing is they have, and when I was a kid, I could go to a penny arcade and put a penny in a slot, and what I would see is these. Yeah. Every one was a separate picture, a little bit separate. But it might be a guy on a horse jumping over a railing. It might be a dog chasing a fox. Okay. We also have a little bit of lag with our eyeballs. Okay. And so every picture that's been called a moving picture isn't. It's a series of stills that you see. Smaller, I suppose, as many is 20 a second. And for a really good camera, it might be 160 for a second. To make the film, you have a can with celluloid on it. Okay. It holds 10 minutes of film. Okay. And that's a reel. But the finished picture can have a film that shows 20 minutes. And so films used to be rated on two reels, 4 reels, 6 reels. Now, some of you are old enough, you remember it. What did you get? You went to the movies on Saturday, and the first thing you got were previews of coming attractions. They still have those, right? Okay. We got 2 feature films, because you could make a whole damn movie in 78 or 80 minutes. Very few of them go longer than that. Now every movie starts at 2 hours at least, because of the sequel that they're going to have to make. Angelina Jolie has got another one to do, and that kind of thing. So we got previews of coming attractions, 2 movies, a cartoon for us kids, okay? Let's see, a newsreel, okay? And what I like is I used to like the aerial bombardment of train yards and ships and that kind of thing. And then you had to have time for this week's giveaway, which you paid for. Okay? This week it might be plates. And next week, when they figured everybody had plates, they might go to cups and that kind of thing. And we could do more of that in less than, say, 2.5 hours. And remember how scary some of them were. The Mummy, the original Mummy. I can remember brother and I were there. Unfortunately, I had to go to the bathroom when I was coming back, coming down the aisle. Now, in the movie, you could drive away at 75 miles an hour, and this dummy dragging that one leg behind him, it'd be there within 2 minutes. And I couldn't find my seat, and the Mummy was coming for me. It's all changed. All right. Now, another thing you can do with room. I saw an interesting film. Anybody want a nice job? I watched my first Estonian film the other night. They need English translators badly. Okay. They butcher the language. Okay. But it was interesting. It was a good film. Okay. So I watched it. Or you can get, in some films, you can get the foreign language at the bottom of the screen. This one did, but it overlapped with other things. Okay, and so it's tough to watch 2 soundtracks at the same time on the same film. But still, it was a good film. Okay, and it'd be nice if they get a good someone to take care of it. Okay, so another thing. It used to be you had time for films when you flew, right? You're flying someplace, they show a movie to keep you occupied. Now, whenever you fly east. Why do you fly east? It used to take 22 hours to get from, say, Pittsburgh to China. The first year I went, say, in 1986. Why do you always fly east? Because the world's turning this way as you're flying this way. So if I'm going from Pittsburgh, say, to China, I fly to Newark. From Newark, I cut up over the corner of, say, Japan, Kamchatka Peninsula, into Russia, about Kursk, Lake Baikal. I start south again, come over Mongolia, say, and land in Shanghai, which I can't go to today because it's on complete lockdown again. Okay. And then coming back, what do? We fly up, we fly over Canada, and then we start down to land at Newark again. And we only have to go back as far as it's Pittsburgh on a backtrack. Okay. So that's the way the world is today. Okay. Now another thing. If you bought a first-class ticket on the initial trip of the Titanic, by today's dollars, it would cost $61,000. That's one way. You didn't get to go back for it. Now, again, if you saw that film last night, you see the stacks of paper they had. They had to keep track of every single passenger. Okay, first class, second class, and steerage. Okay. Now, they did admit there were a couple of mistakes in the film last night. One mistake at the very beginning, they did fail to break a champagne bottle on the prow of the ship. because the White Star Line didn't waste money on champagne. They didn't break it. Okay. And the other thing, at the end of the film, there was a mistake. Okay. No one ever played or ever sang, what was that?
Nearer my God to thee.
Yeah, nearer my Lord to thee. They did ragtime, jazz, waltzes. The closest they came was a French piece called something like Autumn Nocturnes. You know, you're not going to say to people, hey, we're going to sing a song because you're going to be dead pretty soon. Another thing, they never assumed that you had enough lifeboats that everybody could be put on them. They always assumed, every transatlantic ship did, that there's going to be a lot of other ships around. So all we need for the lifeboats is to take people to another ship. There was, in this case, the California, about 8, possibly 10 miles away, shooting off rockets. They had no idea, and said, don't wake me anymore. That's the way their ships talk to each other. Okay? So don't bother me with it. Now, moreover, the Titanic used a private company in its radio room, a Marconi company. And they were interested in getting things that passengers wanted, buying, say, some more stock. Okay, one guy wanting to make sure that at least 2 private railroad cars were in New York City when the ship pulled in. Okay, and the United States government wouldn't let third-class passengers off the ship. They wouldn't let them off the ship because then it sailed to Ellis Island to make sure, and the one guy said, well, they were those kinds of people you call Dagos. Okay? But they weren't as bad as the ones, say, from Central or Eastern Europe, who knew which kind of diseases they were bringing to the United States. Okay? So it was a different world, and you couldn't get from the United States to Europe if you didn't go by ship or were a hell of a swimmer. Okay? So, as I say, it's a totally different world. Okay. Now, another thing when we were up on the Highlands doing this, remember a clue I gave you? Okay. Men wear hats, working men wear caps. So if they get a hat on, they're either first or second class. If they get a cap on, they're first class, or they're third class. Women, a fancy hat, but gloves. And always, if you were first class, gloves. You'd rather go without underwear than gloves. Now, what did the poor people wear? Kerchiefs. And then they say the trouble is, the poor people had been browbeaten for so long that they were still being browbeaten. They were down there kneeling in the third-class cabins, or the third-class rec room, I guess it would be, praying for God to save them. Remember, again, this, you can tell the Eastern European this way, and you can tell the Western. Now, again, you're all old enough. Testicles, spectacles, testicles, wallet, and watch. And it makes more sense to put your wallet here, because it's tough to get it with your right hand. The other guy can get it quicker than you can. Okay. Women wore bandanas or kerchiefs, okay, so you could tell. Now, another thing, the White Star Line did a nice job for its workers that built the ship. Okay. They gave them half a day off. Free. They cut their wages by half and made them have to come there. Now, again, if you buy a ticket on the Titanic, the price goes up. As the day it was bought, it was like $2,360, $61,000 today. But you own something, property. Wages get erased by inflation. So the average worker on the Titanic got paid £2 British per day. Okay, and what he actually lost was something like $1.30 by today's terms, because inflation took all the rest of it away. Okay, another thing is generally it came from Belfast, okay, and then it went to Cherbourg, put more equipment on, put more passengers on, went to, I guess the place today is named Cobb, the very southwesternest place in Ireland, and then it's going to sail across the Atlantic. Okay, the ship is 4 football fields in length, 370 meters. Okay, it's 32 meters wide, which would make it about 90 feet wide. So a ship, biggest one ever built, 400 meters by 90 meters. And it's got a draft of about 30 meters, a little bit more. Okay. Now, you know sailors are superstitious. One of their big superstitions is they launch the keel on a Friday. You know, Friday's an unlucky day. Okay. Another thing is they had actually very few sailors because they had a whole mess of engineers and electronic specialists. Okay. They estimate its top speed was about 24 miles per hour, about 46,000 horsepower. It's got 4 smokestacks because people thought 4 looked a lot better than any other number. The last one, the smokestack, it was a fake. But what it could do is it could vent some of the steam from boilers, the kitchens, the electronic stuff, all of that kind of stuff, except that it was noisy as hell if you got all those whistles going off. When they launched it, slid down the ways, it made a big wave when it went in. It ripped 2 ships free of their moorings. And they almost got to the stage, if a tug hadn't caught it, for an American ship out of New York, running in, it got within 4 feet of a collision with the Titanic. Now, then the weather turned nice. And when they got to where the Titanic was trying to cross the ocean, there were some things, they went a little bit further south than they normally would. And the Californian, 8-10 miles away, simply anchored for the night. And they say that most of what the guys on the crow's nest could see was clear water, not a wave of any kind. Had it not been starlight, there would have been little waves breaking along the edge, the bottom of the icebergs. There's another thing too, is what they tried to do when they hit the iceberg, okay, is loop around it. You guys, I can just tell looking at it, you're all track fans. Okay. Watch the high jump. Not a high jumper in the world ever gets his whole body over the bar at the same time. If this is the bar, he goes this way. But that's nice and smooth. Most of an iceberg is underwater. Okay. 16 separate compartments they had. The original hole was along a seam in the bottom, about 10 feet up, and I believe the Titanic had like a 35, 40-foot draft. Okay. They ran the speed trials for the first time coming from Cobb in Ireland because it cost 96 to 99 tons of coal per day to go, and it generated 46,000 horsepower. Okay. They had doors that were completely closed, except that some of them, when it got hit, they didn't use the best kind of rivets either place. What they were afraid of was cold water hitting a boiler and causing an explosion. So what they did is they actually had some let it go. And before the Titanic ever started sailing, one of the coal bunkers spontaneously burst into flames. And it was still burning when the thing sunk. Those things happen. Now, again, 20 ships, 20 more lifeboats could have taken every passenger plus. Because the assumption every ocean liner made was they're going to be ships all over the place. If one ship's in a place where there's an iceberg, there's going to be others. So all we got to do is get them from the Titanic to a neighboring ship and everybody is safe. Okay. Except the Californian who said, I don't know why they're shooting off rockets. That's the way they talk to each other. Another one said there's another thing. Poor people have been beaten down for so long that any of their betters can beat them down. And they were kneeling and praying for God to save them. I forget who the guy was that said that God, the ship was unsinkable. God wouldn't do that anymore. Well, it turned out God needed a little bit of help. Okay. But they were down there on their knees praying for God. And you're not going to say, hey, we're going to play a song because you're going to love it. It's going to say you're going to die in the next couple of hours. Okay? Because the ship that was busting its tail to get there was the Carpathia, and the quickest they could get there, their top speed was 17 miles per hour. And it would take them about 4.5 hours. Again, think ahead to another war, the Lusitania. Okay, we don't need a British escort. We're faster than the escort ships, but damn it, don't zigzag because that's going to use more coal. Coal costs money. We know they're waiting along the coast, but go there anyhow because that'll save money if we take a longer way around. If we went up over the top of Ireland and came down, well, that'd cost more money in coal and went too fast. And besides, the ship would just have to sink there. The longer it sits waiting to get into harbor, the more money it's going to cost. Okay, so those kinds of things make money. Workers don't make money. Okay. Now, I came across some figures I think you'll probably find interesting. Remember all those stacks of forms they had that all has to be written down. Walter Lord, when he made his film, had access to all of those kinds of things. Okay. People were gonna break things, right? Okay. There were 137,000 glasses on the Titanic for, what, 7,000 people, 5,000 people? 29,000 plates, that's probably a better guess of how many people would be eating at one time. 218,600 cups, okay? And over 46,000 sets of cutlery. And that's probably what they figured the ship would use in a single day, okay? Again, the superstitious sailors are, Friday is not a good day, okay? When they stopped at Cobb and set out from Cobb, not only is it Friday again, what days did the ship sink? 14th and 15th of April, okay? Because the 13th was Friday the 13th, okay? So their trouble started with Friday the 13th, okay? Now, again, the trouble is, if the guy goes over the high jump bar, it's smooth. But a lot of an iceberg is underwater. There were 16 separate sealable compartments, okay, but it was leaking in too many of them. The original hole in the side of it was 12 feet square. But that meant the water was coming into the Titanic faster than the pumps could pump it out. And what they decided to do is we're gonna have to open some of these watertight doors and bring extra pumps in if we have to move them manually to get them there. Because the water's coming in faster than we can get it out. So what happens then? If there's a crack, and there was a crack right at the crucial point in the hull, where it bends the plates, and you open gaps for more water to come in. And if the crack is long enough, it's like putting water in a slightly tilted ice cube tray. Okay, it goes over one into the next, and over two into the next. And the guy that was the chief designer on the ship told them within, I suppose, 30 minutes, the ship is going to sink. And the captain says, it can't, it's unsinkable. He says, it's going to sink. And when it sunk, it was traveling, the pieces that were floating to the bottom of the ocean were running about 35 miles an hour. And that's when they dug so deeply into the bottom. Okay. And then the people were weird. Yeah, that's one thing I learned. People were weird. There's a woman who's, where is it? They tell us to put our life jackets on and go up to the boat deck. I can't find it. She's got on her vanity her jewel case open. And finally she unlocks it, locks the drawer, and finds her little ceramic piggy bank where you can turn the tail and it makes music. And that's more important than her jewelry is. Now, there's also the head of Macy's on the ship, CEO, a guy named Strauss, okay, who had also been a congressman, okay. And they say, well, you know, you're old, you're ex-congressman. Yeah, although you're not a woman or a child, we can put you on an empty seat. And his wife says, I'm not going. We've been married all of this time. I'll be damned if I'll go without him. So they sat on deck chairs. Guggenheim, the head of the Guggenheim Foundation, he says, it's uncomfortable, that damn life jacket. And what he has walking behind him is his personal valet, okay? And in the end, he goes back and changes and puts a tuxedo on and a tall silk hat. He says, if I'm going to die, at least I'll die like a gentleman. Okay. So there were lots of nuts around in those days. Unfortunately, we still got a lot of them here, right? Okay. Now, so we had a ship that's going to sink. We have people praying that it won't. It's going to, okay? Let's see. Again, as I say, 4 funnels because they felt they looked nice. Every big ship had 4 funnels, okay? The funnels would be about probably close to 40 feet high. And it got to the point where they were unstable and they began to break. Okay. Another thing, when they made the film, they filmed the film with using still water in a little swimming pool in November, the temperature -2 degrees Fahrenheit. But then you get to the stage where you're going to have people jumping overboard, throwing things overboard, lifeboats coming down, and that kind of thing. People throwing deck chairs into the water and so on. All of this, okay? And the guy that was the key to telling the story in the one we saw last night, okay? He is supervising letting the winches. And remember, these are let out slowly by hand. Each boat can hold 65 people. The first 2 went off with a combined total of less than 130. And the second boat was unsinkable Molly Brown, who wasn't unsinkable until several years after the Titanic sunk. She finally got her a nickname. Okay. Another thing, we're not set up here well enough, but because of the way your eyes work, if you shut your eyes and stare at me, let's say there was a white background behind me, you could see my shadow. You could see if I was moving, okay. The best seats in the house at the best theater is actually the front row of the balcony. Below you, you got the poor people. Okay. Second class, maybe third class probably couldn't afford it. Then you have the orchestra pit with an orchestra in it. Okay. Then you have the edge of the stage and you have actors. And the actors are talking their speech, things you can't hear because they haven't been said yet. Okay. Why? Because the speed of light is faster than the speed of sound. And our brains make the correction for us. Okay. Now, we do know there were conversations, but those were not on film. Okay. Dancers are dancing to music. They haven't heard yet, and you haven't heard yet. Okay. Sometimes the last row of the orchestra, where the percussion instruments are, they're playing music you can't hear. And if it's a surround stage, and you're sitting off a bit to one side, you hear the sound from the speaker nearest you a fraction of a second before the sound comes the other way. Okay. We tend to forget all of those kinds of things. Okay. Now, I say there was this line of rivets. They didn't use the best rivets, either of the best 2 kinds, for 2 reasons. They cost more money. Okay. But what they were more afraid of is hot, or let's say, cold water rushing into the ship hitting a hot boiler and causing explosion. So what they were doing is actually dousing as much of the fires as they can, pulling the hot coals out and dousing them so that the poor guys working are in steam all the time. Okay. Another thing is there are people that notice that the ship isn't quite straight, but it was possible to launch a lifeboat with, say, as much as a 7 or 8 degrees list from either side. And there are 20 lifeboats plus 4 collapsible lifeboats. Okay. Now, the captain of the ship, okay, he apparently intended to go down with the ship. But when he gave abandon ship, everybody for themselves, as the front of the deck, the bridge went under, a wave came roaring in and waved him, washed him off the deck. He was unconscious at the time, brought to consciousness there in the ocean, okay? And in the end, chose to die, so he did die afterwards. Okay. So this is the Titanic. Okay. Now, again, some of the doors close this way, some close that way. But like the ice cube, eventually it's too much. And they'll probably never be able to raise the Titanic because it crashed into the mud at the bottom at 35 miles per hour. And then biology took over. Okay. For example, they can find there in the bottom, we do know that the Titanic split in half because there's a 600-foot gap. And there are places in that gap, and even places inside the Titanic. Remember, they have done a couple of expeditions inside the Titanic, where there are 2 pairs of shoes side by side from a couple. But the biology is taking care of destroying all the actual tissue and that kind of stuff. Okay. So the Titanic went down. Yeah, it can be raised, but it'll fall apart if they try to raise it. Okay. There's also, and I found out this morning, there's a second case. At least 2 cases of murder on the Titanic. Oh, that's like murder on the Orient Express. Okay. In one, just about the time that the radio room is told to shut down, okay, the 2 sets of life jackets for the 2 operators are there. Incidentally, the one got to use the new call for the very first time, and for him the very last time. SOS had just been adopted. Okay. But anyhow, a guy broke in and tried to steal the 2. So the one picks up a club from the table and beats him on the head, and they get out with him laying there, blood on the floor. And it's also said that at one point, what they did on the Titanic is they opened the armory and gave a revolver to every officer and chief petty officer, okay? And there seems to be some evidence that at least one officer, when there were no women and children, and he wasn't willing to put men in the empty seats, came forward and fired bullets into the chest of 3 different men who were trying to get what he felt was a seat for women. Okay. Supposedly, as I say, very difficult to hear. Again, you were supposed to have provisions on every lifeboat. What do they need provisions for? They're only gonna go to some other boat that's just a few miles away. They'll have provisions there. I think 2 of all of the 20 lifeboats, someone from the kitchen threw a sack of bread in. But no drinks, no first aid kits, none of that stuff, because they're going someplace else for a little bit of time. Okay. Now, again, things have changed. And the last of the film is, oh, we got it nice today. We got real fire drills, real lifeboat drills. They did these on the run. It was cold up on deck. You weren't going to go up for that. Not when you could hear nice music, like you're going to die pretty soon. Okay, down in a nice warm cabin. Okay, and another, the guy that was the center of the protagonist, he fired 3 shots in the air to make them back off. Okay, and so now it's your turn to talk, not me. You tell me what you thought of the film last night and why.
Question. Did they feed the third class?
Did they what?
Did they actually feed in the trip, the third class?
Better than the first class ever ate in its life before that. You ought to see the menus they had for the first class. Okay, and the second class. Well, I got some figures here. Let's see if I can find them. Okay. Now, what I'm looking at here for is I'm looking for women, children, men, and crew as surviving. Okay. Let's take kids. Among the first class, there were 6 kids. 5 survived. Okay. Among second class, there were 24 kids. 24 survived. Among third class, there were 79 kids. Okay. And let's see, 79 kids, 61%, 62% of them actually died. Okay. So that's the kids, okay. Women, okay. In first class, 144 women, 140 of them survived. It's not bad, 4 died, okay. Among the second class women, 412, and 80 of them survived. So that means they had a death rate of 54%, okay? And men, well, let's see, 165, no, this is women too. 165, third class, 714 total, and about 67% of third class made it. The crew, 23 women, 20 of them lived. Okay. Of the crew as a whole, the 425, 360 some were saved. Okay. So they lost about 61%. Okay. So of the total, 2,224 people on board. That's 100% of the people on board. Okay. Now, 710 were saved. 1,514 died. And there was room on the ship around them for every one of those to have survived. Okay. So in effect, that's about 63% of those that reminded the one crewman of the Dago type. See, I'm not going to ask you to tell me that because you would want. It publicly said in Wheeling that you're of that type. Okay. Yeah, but they were worse if they were from further east. Okay. Because they didn't trade the right way. So go ahead now, talk a little bit.
How deep was the ocean at that point?
The ocean at that point.
Did the ship go to the
Yeah,
bottom?
as I understand it, the draft of the ship would have been about 40 to 50 meters. And so it's going down that deep from, I suppose it's going down at the broken parts are going at 35 miles an hour before they crash into the mud. So it's a few hundred, 26, maybe 2,600 feet. Now, we got equipment today that we could bring it up at that depth, except biology has taken over and the microbes, as soon as we tried to raise it, would fall apart. They did actually try to raise one of the big pieces, and that's what happened, is it simply fell apart when they got a little bit up in the air. All right, you're not going to get dismissed early today.
How did they recreate?
What?
How did they recreate jumping off that ship into a swimming pool? Did I understand that right?
Yeah, the guy that's the main protagonist, remember, he stands there, slide the dead people off this upturned boat into the water and pull somebody else on board, okay? And the temperature is, say, 2 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, okay? Earlier, there were others that were using oars to knock people off the boat, to keep people away. One thing he did too is he brought 2 lifeboats together and crowded most of the people into one that was upright so that there were fewer people trying to get on the up one. But he says he had to jump into that swimming pool at about 11 p.m. at the end of November. And he says the trauma when you hit the water, he says his brain is saying, get up there and tell people don't jump. Don't jump, you're going to freeze to death. He says his body simply couldn't. He said, I thought I was going to die. I finally made it up. And there were deck chairs flying, there were people jumping in next to me. And I'm trying to say don't, and no one can even hear me. So yeah, it's probably not a place where anyone would like to jump into the water at that temperature, except a group of nuts in Pittsburgh that on New Year's Day jump into the Allegheny River.
So did anybody die in the making of that film?
I haven't found a record of it.
Okay.
I haven't found a record of it. Now, the other thing is, again, and I hate to tell secrets like this, but as I mentioned to some of you, we used, where the house where I live, a side porch and went up the back stairs rather than the front. A beautifully cut sandstone wall connects that to the next house down, which interestingly, my sister now owns. So that means because of the tilt of the land, in each of those houses, there's sort of a tiny apartment below what actually would be the first floor. And as I say, with that crawl space, To get around the corner, there were braces. It was like a hall coming from the wall of our house out to the edge of the steps. Okay. And there was a framework, a triangle framework, and a very difficult bush to squeeze around to get into what we call the bunny hole. Okay. And Delphine and I used to crawl into the bunny hole with neck. After all, I was going from 5 to 9, and she was going from 7 to 11. Okay. And to this day, I've told some of you, she smelled and tasted like Campbell's tomato soup. And she taught me so much that if I have anything that has a cooked tomato sauce, I think of Delphine. I don't care what spaghetti, whether it's meatballs, marinara, or meat sauce. Yeah, Delphine is there in my dreams. Whether it's taco sauce over rice, she's there. And I notice on local television, the ones that West Liberty shows coming from Wheeling Park High, they have a connection with Campbell's soup, and they mention the tomato soup. So they all know what Delphine was like. Okay, and I think now the trouble is, she's also French Canadian, and their names, Delphine, doesn't it sound romantic? Her family name was Plurd. Not a very nice sounding name. There's another film called Still Mine about the Bay of Fundy area of Canada. Who's the guy is in his 60s, but he's playing a guy in his 80s, and Geneviève Bujold is the, he mentions the girl that he threw up on her shoes. She says, other than that, he said, listen, she's been dead for 35 years. Okay. And they felt there, now they got hospitalization. Okay. In the old days, if you had a cold, you had a cold and you lived with it. Okay. You didn't go to the damn hospital for a cold. Okay. They were, in effect, they said that regulations, God wants us to live on our own. We don't need help. Okay. They live in too big a house. Okay. What are they using a backhoe for to do this? They ought to be digging it by hand. Okay. And he's got a wife she's slowly going with Alzheimer's. Okay. And you guys, if we ever get back